All right, welcome back. We're back for more FRC stuff. This one I promise to keep on time because now I'm not running into my own presentation. I'll be running into the broadcast. So everybody's going to want me to get off the microphone then. All right, you already know who I am. I am still the same person I was 20 minutes ago. This one, kind of a different, similar but different. We're going to just look at a couple of different patterns. There's tons of patterns in FRC, these archetypes, whether it's game piece archetypes, whether it's types of strategies, field designs. So we're just going to look at a handful of these that, again, who knows? Maybe one of these will be relevant to this year's game. And if not, at least you'll be all the more educated on old FRC stuff. All right, we're going to start at looking at some bar climbing endgames because, boy howdy, we've seen a lot of those in the last 10 years or so. So a bar climbing endgame is you've got a metal bar and you've got to climb it. And it's at the end of the game. And you get points. Probably the one that most are familiar with because some of you were students on the team this year. 2022 Rapid React had 4 different bars that you could climb from. You got more points the higher up you went. The bars were spread out from each other as you got those top 3 ones. They were about a foot up and 2 feet forward. The way the robot rules were with extension, you couldn't drive your robot flat on the ground and reach straight up to the traversal rung. There was no rules against skipping rungs or like where you had to start, but you just physically couldn't reach up that way. Now I say flat from the floor because if you were around this year, you probably saw some teams that said, well, I'm not going to stay flat on the floor. I'm going to drive up the wall or up the truss. Or I'm going to drive underneath it and just jump in the air because I'm from Canada and we build cool jumping robots there. There were some wild ones. You saw some teams like 254 posted here that would grab onto the mid-rung and like use some cool leverage in order to skip and go over to the traversal. But you also saw some cool like going from, a lot of teams started at the mid-rung because it was easy enough to grab and then extending onto the high rung onto the traversal. We could probably have a whole presentation about different traversal climbers from that year, but we will not. Another bar climbing endgame, a big bar in 2020/2021. This was the endgame, the shield generator, and it was a like 9.5 foot long bar. The unique part about this one is that there was a pivot in the center. So you can see from this photo that the bar would pivot if you grabbed on one end. So normally it was about 5 feet high, but if a robot grabbed the one side and now it's tilted all the way, it could go all the way down to 4 feet, or on the opposite, you're having to reach up to 6 feet. So you got more points if you had multiple robots and the bar was level during the end game. So it was a challenge of having to like coordinate with your partners and either try to get everybody to go all climb at one time, or to grab and then have a partner that could reach higher or lower or whatever the case might be. More bars. 2018, charged up. You can see in the bottom right there, it was like just over a 1 foot bar, so a much smaller bar that you had to grab onto. You could have multiple robots grab onto it, and you can see it's a smaller target to hit, so trying to share that bar with multiple robots was a bigger challenge. The way that the game worked that year, you were allowed to carry other robots, though. So you can see in this photo, 254 is climbing from the bar, and they, like a lot of teams, had like forklifts or a ramp that another robot would drive onto, and then you would lift them up with it, which was pretty neat. And you could get credit for, by scoring other game pieces and another game mechanism, you could get credit for one robot hanging. So in theory, your max points is to have 3 robots hanging from the bar, but if you scored those other points, you could get the equivalent credit that way. If you had a robot, which we saw a lot of the higher-end teams do, that had a ramp or a way to do a buddy climb, then really you only need one robot that's grabbing on and climbing up that bar. 2016, if you were here 20 minutes ago, you saw this, Stronghold. 3 individual bars, each one would have only 1 robot on it. That was probably the most straightforward. It was just reach up, grab the bar, and pull yourself up. You had to be above the low goals to get scored. As I mentioned a little while ago, that year's game with some of the defenses to go under, if teams wanted to go under that 16-inch bar off the ground, then it just made for a packaging problem. So you saw cool like unfolding arms or telescoping arms or scissor lift climbs like this one, or the 118 grapple hook. All right, last bar climbing one we'll look at, Ultimate Ascent 2013. That was where there was a whole pyramid in the middle of the field made of bars. 30 inches between each level, and that one did have rules about you had to traverse from one bar to the next. So you couldn't just go straight to the top. There was no rules about how you had to hang off the pyramid. So 254 showing off of the grabbing like the bottom. They had similar to 2022 teams that used like an extension, a telescoping arm in order to grab up. Or you also saw teams that would go on the corners, the outside corners of the pyramid. So trying to grab like with two little fingers and extend up, grab the next one, you kind of drove up the side. By the way, half the reason I have 254 pictures in here is because back in like 2013 or 2011, they're one of the only teams that posted quality pictures of their robots and have videos. All right, so it's kind of a specific feature of the field. Another thing that's come up a couple times throughout FRC history is fields with restricted zones that robots could be in. And this certainly goes way back, further back than I'll show here, but a few recent examples. In 2019, the field was split in half, red side, blue side. And the restriction was that you could only have one robot on your opponent's side of the field, aka you can only send one defensive robot over there. In addition, you couldn't extend outside of your frame perimeter if you were on the opposite side. So thinking of like going over and stealing game pieces from another alliance, from the opponent alliance, wasn't very feasible in this year. You could still kind of bounce them over maybe, but you just stay within your frame perimeter. And because of the way the field was laid out, you saw kind of the classic 2 offense, 1 defense. You'd have one robot take each side of your home field to score on and send your third robot over to play defense. Or you could stick with all 3 on one side and just keep them all offense. Sometimes you'd have a hybrid. A team would maybe go over for part of the match, come back for part of the match. The way this field was laid out, though, it was pretty easy to play defense. Robots had to pick up from one side, drive, and score over here. You could just park a robot here and kind of cut them off from a whole side of scoring. So you did see a lot of teams would send their one defender over to the other side. 2016, again, we dove into this in the previous presentation, but the field split into thirds there, the courtyards, which were the offense zones, and then the center neutral zone. And again, it was the restriction of only one robot into your opponent's courtyard, aka only one that could be like a pure defense robot over there. A lot of these rules were just to help so that you didn't just send like 2 or 3 robots over and just completely shut down the opponent alliance. And as mentioned, you had to go you had to go over the defenses into your courtyard or like around to get to your opponent's courtyard area. So it was lots of you had to like really travel all the way across the field in order to get to playing defense. And the most classic example of split fields and split zones, Recycle Rush. It was completely split. There was no interacting with the opponent robots. The alliances were completely separate, blue side and red side. No robot interaction meant no bumpers, so that was fun. We just had big giant signs on it that said, "Here's my team," because I don't have bumpers on it. But the only interaction that happened in this game was these garbage cans, these recycling cans. There was 4 staged on the center line, and in the first quarter of a second, teams would have these like massive arms or like grappling hooks to grab the cans over to their side, and then after that, you never like did anything with the opponent alliance. except for throw pool noodles at them, try to get them tripped up, tripping on some litter. All right, last one we'll look at here, as again some patterns, is games that have had multiple game pieces. And this one I can confidently say because First has told us that this year's game will have 2 different game pieces with it. So that's my tie-in. That's my secret WikiLeaks, 2 game pieces. So in 2023, as a lot of you guys know, we had the 2 different game pieces, the cone and the cube. You would put that cone onto these metal poles that were sticking up in the scoring grid, and then the inflated cube were on the little shelves there. In 2023, you saw a lot of teams that used the same mechanism for both game pieces because they were similar. Certainly, a cone and a cube, they've got differences to it, but you can see the EveryBot, the 118 EveryBot mechanism in the top left there was designed to be able to intake that inflated cube or pinch the cone. The 111 staying claw up top there that did it. So the game pieces were similar of enough size, and you were trying to do the same thing with them, right? You're basically trying to reach up and eject that game piece either onto a peg or onto a shelf. It was pretty similar, so it kind of made sense for teams to try to use the same mechanism for both game pieces. You did see a little bit of some teams would use a separate cube intake. So High Tide down here, one of the world champs from that year, you could see their intake that could do both cones and cubes. It actually was pretty similar to the EveryBot intake. 118 just casually releasing like one of the best intakes for the entire game in a week. But they also had an extension intake that it almost treated the cubes like a ball. It just tried to like intake it like a ball, and then it would just, it would give you a wider area to try to pick up those cubes with. 2019 was, again, 2 different types of game pieces. So you had the hatches, which were those big plastic circles with Velcro on the edges. The center was open like a donut. And then the cargo was a big orange inflated playground ball. And you would score them either into the rocket, which was kind of your vertical one, or the cargo ship, which was a bunch of bays that were all kind of ground level. So with this, again, you're going to the same place with these game pieces, right? You're either having to reach up high to get the high level of the rocket ship, or you're trying to kind of get them in similar places. But the game pieces were different enough that it wasn't as common where teams would use the same mechanism for both. The right side shows that. So this is an example, again, 254, picking on them because they've got good pictures I can see. The wheeled intake that they used that year, you can see it where it would separate out and you'd be able to take a cargo piece in, or it would move the 2 wheels in and then you would reach that into the center of the hatch. But a lot of teams also did 2 separate mechanisms, again, because those game pieces were so different. So the shots on the left here, actually from our robot that year, we used this like beak mechanism that we saw some other teams using, and it worked out pretty well to kind of spear in the center of the hatch, and then you would expand it to hold it. And then we had a whole separate mechanism for grabbing the cargo that allowed us to just put that down and roll the ball in. So again, same places. These were both like on our elevator that would go up and down, but the game pieces were more unique, so it lended itself a little bit more towards separate manipulators. All right, and then last one, 2017 Power Up. That's not Power Up. 2017 Steamworks, typo. The game pieces that year, so there was these big plastic gears that you had to deliver more gears to the airship pegs, and then fuel, the 5-inch wiffle balls that you might have gotten as packing material in an Andy Mark shipment recently, because they still have a warehouse full of them. And there was like 500 of them around the field, and you would launch them all up into the boiler. These ones were, the game pieces were totally different sizes, different shapes. They were going to different areas. The gear would go onto a peg on the airship in the middle of the field, whereas the fuel you were shooting up and in to this boiler. So this is an example where they were totally separate, so you you needed separate things. Generally, robots weren't like launching the gear through a ball shooter onto the peg in the middle of the field. But they were unique enough in size that you could package them in similar areas without having to worry about them conflicting. So you can see a couple of shots there, like 254 or 2767, two of the champs that year, where their intake area, where they had a gap in the bumpers to intake those fuel balls into the robot, they could also fold down a gear manipulator, and you didn't really have to worry about like the wiffle ball getting stuck in that gear manipulator. You could fold it down, grab the gear, fold it back up, and you're good to go. You did see some other teams that had totally separate mechanisms. 1986 Team Titanium that just took the gear in from the human player chute, so it would load up and in, or from the top coming down, hold it in their front of their robot until they dropped it off at the airship. But again, the different sizes allowed teams to not have to worry as much. Versus 2023, for example, the cone and cube, very similar in size. So if you were going for one of those game pieces and another was in the way, you might have to worry about picking up two of them, which was not allowed that year. All right. So that was just, in summary, just a couple of the patterns you see in past FRC games. There's tons of different patterns. As I mentioned, we know that this year's game, there's two different game pieces, so maybe keep in mind or go look back at 2017, 2019, 2023, see how teams designed different mechanisms for different game pieces or designed one mechanism for the same game piece. So thank you very much for your attention. Appreciate it.